sacred incense. A fragrant cloud rose, enveloping the place in a halo of divine light. It was the sign that the covenant between God and his people was not merely an agreement, but a living communion, a bond that no nation or empire could break. Chapter 7, The Step Toward Freedom. The roar of the wind and the crashing of the waters formed a divine symphony. Before the people, the Red Sea had parted into two gigantic walls of water, leaving a dry path in the middle. Sunlight filtered through the suspended waves, illuminating the path as if it were a sacred corridor. The people moved forward, some running with children in their arms, others gazing in awe at the walls of water rising on either side, sustained by sheer faith. Moses at the front held his staff aloft. His simple tunic fluttered in the wind, and his eyes never left the horizon. There was no fear in him, only an unwavering determination, to lead his people to freedom. On the opposite shore, the roar of hooves echoed like thunder. Pharaoh, mounted on his war chariot, watched with overflowing rage as the Hebrews escaped. His voice, filled with fury, gave orders to the soldiers to pursue them without mercy. The Egyptian chariots hurtled down the open road, their horses running wild with panic and the din of battle. The wheels sank slightly into the damp sand, and the clash of metal against the ground reverberated throughout the marine valley. Then the decisive moment arrived. With a deafening roar, the waters began to collapse. The liquid walls collapsed upon the Egyptian army, and cries of terror mingled with the roar of the sea. In seconds, the force of the waves erased every trace of chariots and soldiers. On the shore, tension turned into jubilation. Miriam, Moses' sister, took a tambourine in her hands and began to dance. The women followed her, forming a chorus of tambourines and songs, celebrating the victory the Lord had given them. Their voices, filled with gratitude, rose to the desert sky. A close-up showed Miriam's hands striking the tambourine with force and rhythm, the instrument's skin vibrating in time with the people's joy. It was the sound of freedom, an echo that would forever be etched in Israel's memory. Chapter 8, The Bread of Heaven. After the victory over Egypt, the Israelite people continued their march, but the jubilation gave way to weariness. They walked through the arid Shur desert, the sun burning their backs and thirst parching their throats. Expressions of fatigue and worry multiplied. Some barely dragged their feet, while others looked to the sky for relief. Upon reaching an oasis called Mara, hope began to shine once more. Among the palm trees, a pool of water seemed to promise rest. However, upon tasting it, the disappointment was bitter, literally. Faces twisted in disgust and murmurs began to grow. Moses, calm, took a piece of wood that the Lord had shown him and threw it into the water. The people watched expectantly, their attention fixed on him. Then the miracle happened. The water turned sweet and crystal clear. Children and adults rushed to drink, relieved, and smiles replaced the bitterness. Later they arrived at Elim, a place of tranquility with 12 springs and 70 palm trees. There they pitched tents, rested in the shade, and regained their strength. For a moment, the desert ceased to be an enemy. But the rest didn't last. In the desert of sin, the food shortage led the people to complain once again. The murmurs and doubts grew louder. Had God brought them out of Egypt only to let them die of hunger? Heaven's answer came in the form of a silent miracle, manna. Like tiny white flakes, it descended gently and covered the ground at dawn. The children gathered it with laughter, and the adults took it with open hands, knowing that each portion was a divine gift to sustain them on their journey. Chapter 9, Water and Bread from Heaven. The manna, fine and white, lay in the calloused hands of an Israelite. Its texture was like that of coriander seeds, and its aroma was reminiscent of freshly baked bread. It was the food that God gave them each morning, the miraculous sustenance that kept them alive in the middle of nowhere. As evening fell, a family gathered around a campfire. Over the embers, the manna mingled with honey, releasing a sweet aroma. Amid smiles and grateful glances, they ate together, silently thanking the Creator for another day of provision. Not everyone, however, trusted. Some gathered more manna than they needed, filling entire baskets, fearful that there would be nothing left tomorrow. They eyed the rest of the camp with suspicion, as if hoarding could guarantee their safety. But when dawn arrived, the stored-up manna was spoiled. Worms wriggled through the mass and the stench forced them to throw it away. It was a reminder that God's provision was daily, not cumulative. On the Sabbath, Saturday, the people observed the manna with respect. On that day no manna fell, and they had learned to obey. They gathered twice as much the day before and stored it, trusting that it would not spoil. It was an exercise in faith and sacrifice but also in rest. On another day's march they reached Rephidim, where thirst once again tormented them. The people argued, accusing Moses of leading them to their deaths. Voices rose, pointing with anger, and the place was called Massah and Meribah, proof and complaint. Moses, at God's command, struck a rock with his staff. Instantly, crystal-clear water gushed forth in abundance, flowing among the stones. Faces went from fury to surprise, and soon the murmur of protest mingled with the sound of pitchers filling and lips drinking. Chapter 10, The Battle Against Amalek. Joshua, a young leader, walked firmly at the head of a group of Israelite warriors. They wore simple armor made of leather and sturdy fabrics, their faces tense and determined, ready to defend God's people. Their eyes reflected courage and hope as they advanced with their spears and shields toward the enemy. On the summit of the nearby mountain, Moses, accompanied by Aaron and Hur, raised his arms to the heavens with fervor. The battle echoed below, and they held prayer and faith as invisible weapons to protect their people. Aaron and Hur took turns holding up Moses's tired arms. The unity between them was palpable. Without that support, Moses' strength would falter and the battle could be lost. Their faces showed concentration, sacrifice, and unwavering faith. Meanwhile, Amalek and his warriors launched a fierce offensive. The enemy soldiers advanced fiercely, shouting and attacking with fury, determined to crush Israel and steal their promised land. But the Israeli soldiers held their ground and gradually gained ground. Their courage was evident in every glance, in every thrust. Hope burned in their hearts as they saw that, with faith and strength, they could defeat their enemies. At sunset the fighting intensified. Moses' arms began to droop with fatigue, and the battle grew more difficult. The enemies were regaining ground, and the Israelites' morale was wavering. It was then that Aaron and Hur, with renewed effort, once again raised the leader's arms and the tide began to turn. In a small shop, a scribe recorded the battle on a parchment with a steady hand. By the light of an oil lamp, the words and symbols recounted the story of the battle, so that future generations would remember their people's faith and perseverance. Chapter 11, The Revelation of the Ten Commandments. Mount Sinai stood majestic, shrouded in dense clouds and echoing with thunder that shook the earth. Lightning bolts zigzagged powerfully, illuminating the dark sky as the Israelite people trembled below, feeling the divine power manifesting before their eyes and ears. With reverence and respect, the Israelites prepared for the sacred encounter. They washed their hands and faces and wore clean robes, seeking to purify themselves to receive the word of God. The air was thick with anticipation and fear, but also with deep faith. High above, Moses stood before the divine presence. His eyes shone and his face was illuminated by a celestial light as he received the stone tablets. The words engraved on them, eternal and sacred, were the covenant between God and his people. From below, the people's hands rose in worship and submission, a collective gesture of surrender and acceptance before the supreme power. It was a moment of unity and solemnity that would be etched in history. At the summit of the mountain, a radiant light symbolized the celestial throne. It was the voice of God, powerful and majestic, heard beyond the clouds and the thunder, emanating authority and holiness. Moses, in a firm and solemn voice, conveyed the Ten Commandments to the people. Each word was a guide to righteous living and to maintaining the covenant with God, a sacred law that